Thanks for joining us on this new compact version of Does It Resonate With You, where we take a whole show from each week and cut it into smaller and more digestible chunks so that you can listen on the go or listen to them all in a row, whatever works for you. We really want you to find your own truth while we discover and discuss ours. And while we're at it, could we encourage you to reach down and hit that subscribe button? Thanks so much. We'll see you on the other side.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Does It Resonate With You? We're really excited today because we've got Lisa Hagenbuch with us, future Echo. She is astrologer extraordinaire. I love working. She taught me things about myself that I knew, but I didn't. How do I put it? She showed me, illuminated things that I thought were issues in my life, problems in my life, and said, well, no, they're in your chart. So now that I have an awareness of that, I can maneuver my life in a way that's a little bit different and then I just say, okay, well, I want what I want when I want it, and it's in my chart. So there you go.
Wow.
I mean, that is literally
show them a
my
copy
chart,
of your chart. Yeah, it is. Show them a copy of your chart. It's right here.
So anyway, Lisa, we've been thinking that we'd love to hear a little bit about people's stories before we really start a conversation. So What brought you to spiritual work, whether it's astrology or constellations, which we're going to talk about? Mm-hmm. I know that you've taken a lot of different classes, and I think even if I remember, you've taken some shamanism classes too.
I have, yeah.
Cool.
So you have a lot of different things that you've done. What brought you to that place in the first place? So tell us a little bit about your journey and, just what would you love us to know?
Sure. Okay. So I was, I guess, in my early 20s. I never really had a hobby or a passion. I was in sales. That was fine. And I always wanted to go see an astrologer. So a coworker said, you have to go see my astrologer. She's the best. Her name is Barb Crowful. I went to see her. She was the best. Unfortunately, she's not here in the physical form anymore, but I left that hour. I went into her weird room like I've created for myself, and I left knowing that that's what I wanted to do. And that was the first time I just knew something, I just I know I want to do this. And so it just began. I always say it's like a jumping down a rabbit hole, astrology, because you can just study it your whole life and never learn it all. So that was, probably around 95, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I started professionally 98. She said, you know more than they do. Just start seeing clients, which is true. You can't just keep it all in your head.
I want to point that out. You know more than they do. Start your practice. Isn't that great advice, Angie?
It really is. Oh,
I mean,
yeah, but for both of you, we've talked about entrepreneurship, spiritual entrepreneurship. That is like, yes, you know more than they do. Start. So anyways, continue, Lisa. Thanks.
But I think even more important than you know more than they do start is you don't need to know everything. It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
you're never going to know everything.
Right.
And in my mind, and this applies to tax preparers and practitioners of any kind, all of them, the most dangerous one to get involved with is the one that tells you they know everything, because they don't. They can't. They cannot. None of them can. Mm-hmm. You need to know what you know. You need to know what you don't know. So you need to know when you should go looking for more information, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So it was really astrology then that started you. And I would say if I rewind my mind back to 95-ish, I think probably being in astrology was, how do I put this? Maybe a little bit more open or welcomed than perhaps tarot readers at the time. Not now, but at the time. Or was it, did you still find there was resistance to it in the air, so to speak?
Yeah, and in my family of origin, they think I'm a witch. So I don't know what they. I don't know what they think I do.
Little do they know, but
little do they. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, because what people take that definition of witch, and it's that picture that you see, like, of the witches in Salem and whatever. But really, the people that in Salem that you need to be concerned about are not the ones that were called witches, but the ones that actually thought it was a good idea to burn them, right? Like
exactly.
just saying. But
Yeah.
anyway, so
I don't know about tarot because I do tarot myself, but I got into it way later.
Right. But that's why so I guess the question is, back in 95 when you decided to do it more professionally, did you run into resistance out there besides with your family? Or were there places that you could go? Like, we met in a shop. You were working out of a shop. So is that what you did to begin with, is go like into a shop setting, or did you do it on your own? Or
I did it on my own. I did, and then I taught some classes, and then I had got married, had children, and then when they were in preschool, I met somebody, and she's like, "You should go work at my friend's shop, Balance Healing in Chicago." And so I'm like, "Oh, that's a good idea." So that started that. So I do partner with other like metaphysical stores. Partnership is a big thing for me. I love to partner with practitioners. I've partnered with you, Angie, before, and others. I like to partner with, other organizations, businesses, because I was a stay-at-home mom. That was my main priority for 2 kids. And so I did this kind of on the side and then slowly grew it over time. And I didn't have time to advertise or market, and social media wasn't a thing at that time, but I didn't want to do that either. So, now that they're in college, I can really, step into it more. And add things to it, which brings me to family constellation work.
Right. And it's really amazing, because I think that there's probably a lot of people out there that think astrology stands on its own, which it can very nicely. But astrology really lends itself to collaboration with all different kinds of work. We did a really great event combining astrology and the Akashic Record, which was just really mind-blowing, because we could not, it fell into the category of you can't make this stuff up, right? Because the things that we saw and the similarities between the chart and then the Akashic archetype, report, were just mind-boggling. Like, whoa. And so, there's a rabbit hole to go down, right? To, try to figure out what that is, or why that is, right? So, but people combine it with tarot. People write astrology decks. There's all kinds
I would
of
say
things.
that many of the best tarot readers they really know their astrology. So when an astrology symbol comes up, or there's a particular like reading, it's interpreted with the astrological implications as well. And those two really go together.
And numerology goes well.
I'm just going to back up 1 second, because I want people to unhear many of the best, and I want them to hear a lot of really good tarot readers combine it with astrology. You don't need to have astrology to be the best at tarot.
Okay, I'll agree with that. Yes. Yep, you're right.
Because that's how I roll, right? Like I just
call me out when you need to.
Well, I don't really want to make it like that, but I don't want somebody to think, oh, well, I'm not even interested in that, so I couldn't possibly be one of the best, right? Sure. So he said many of the best, right? So you don't need it. So just, I don't know. That feels like a slippery slope now, but it felt like something that needed to be said. So I'm going to tell them all to shut up. I can't really do that. I can't really do that. They don't shut up when I tell them to. So anyway, we'll move on. So now what you're doing is you are doing something called dynamic constellations, right? Like, that's a really fascinating process.
Well, family constellations.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Dynamic Constellations is the name of the business. Somebody I know that does.
I've
run across constellating in the past. I've done it myself, and I've heard of it. So I just that was just a oops.
Yeah.
So family, and it's got an interesting origin, family constellations, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Bert Hellinger is the father of it. He was from Germany. Didn't want to go into around World War II, didn't want to go into the army. So he actually, I think, was imprisoned at one point. Then he became a psychoanalyst. And
like that, World War II?
Yeah, he just died recently. And then he did a lot in psychology, but then he also became a Jesuit priest on a missionary trip to work with the Zulus. He spent a lot of time with them, and he noticed that there were orders of love and flow in families. And when the orders were adhered to, then everything operated smoothly in a family line. And so out of that, he created these orders of love in family, in our family systems. And this work is about looking for and shifting the dysfunctional patterns that get handed down from one generation to the next. Because when Grandma Bertha dies and she's got this big issue she's working on, the issue doesn't necessarily die with her. Her granddaughter, who may not have even been born at the time, might come in and go, oh, I want our system to be whole and intact. So I'm going to take on this issue and I'm going to clear it. But it didn't start with her and it doesn't belong to her. And so then while she tries to clear it, things go haywire in her life. And so this work is really about getting everything back in order and seeing it from a very kind of bird's eye view and seeing what's out of order and just putting it back in so that love can flow, order can flow. There's a lot of more peace and resolution in the family line. And then the descendants don't have to come in, and work on these issues.
Well, so isn't that very interesting?
Did you say, sorry, did you say this was done by a Jesuit priest?
So Bert Hellinger, among his many titles at one point, was a Jesuit priest. Wow. And he did missionary work with the Zulus. And that's what really
fascinating.
It is.
One of my favorite books is called The Medium and the Priest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, anyway, there's a lot of people that are spiritually connected in one tradition seem to be able to connect well when they realize that they don't have to stay in the box with deeper spiritual paths. Anyway,
and I like that you say that too, because he really didn't certify or officially train practitioners to do his work. And he continued to evolve how he did it throughout his life. And so as a result of that, I find that facilitators will do this work, in a slightly different way. Like I blend astrology, which my teacher was like, I don't know how you could do that, but it works really well for me because in the birth chart, everyone and everything in your life is contained in there. So all your ancestors are contained in there. And so it's my entree anyway to somebody's energy field. So I do it that way. He does energy work. He can read the energy in the whole room. And I'm like, well, I can't really do that. But if I get the birth charts of the family members, I can read that. So there's just, there's just
stop. You can read the energy in the room.
Okay.
You just can't. She can, people. She can. She won't tell you she can because maybe she doesn't know yet she can, but she can. So I know. Stop. They need to stop. Like, whatever. I'm on a mission to convince Lisa how powerful she is. So now I'm doing it on recording so that but whatever. I will get there. But what I was going to say before is that it's interesting. You have it, so you see it from the astrology perspective that all of those things are present in the chart. Mm-hmm. And in the energy work world, we talk a lot about generational karma, genetic karma, which is different than ancestral or akashic karma. Like because there is akashic karma as well. So so one is the story. We've been through this with astrology, right, and akasha. Akasha is the story of the soul, and astrology is the story of the human. So it would make a lot of sense that your focus is astrology, the human, and then that you would bring this constellation work in, which also addresses, now further gives you access to information about the human because you're looking at genetic karma and the ancestors. Fascinating. I mean, we know there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everybody, all the practices are the same. It's just different ways to get at it. But what I'm most fascinated by at this moment is that this man sorted this out around the time of World War II. Like, that's mind-boggling to me.
Well, actually, I think it was in the 90s that he came up with the family constellation. So it's kind of, okay. but it was like a long journey for him to get to this. So family constellations, and they're much more prevalent and internationally. It's just kind of starting to catch on in the States.
It's a fascinating practice. I mean, I've heard stories. John and I have both had readings, but quickly, I know somebody that has done events where it's been done with live people, moving live people around the room, which I just think would be so fun. And because you and I, Lisa, are local, I would love to, maybe we could facilitate that sometime and just, kind of see what that looks like. I think it would be a lot of fun.
Sure.
And then I forgot what the other thing was. Oh, well.
Well, that's how that was my entree into this work. Is a friend of mine had told me about it a long time ago. I actually thought it had to do with astrology because of the constellation piece of it. So then I was flipping through the Infinity Foundation catalog, and I'm like, oh, family constellation work. So I emailed the teacher and I said, can I combine this with astrology? And he called me and we had like an hour conversation about it. And he's like,
that's awesome.
I know he's an awesome guy. Barry Cross. He's amazing. He's in Chicago. I still learned from him, took trainings and all of that. But he said, I do these workshops downtown once a month. Why don't you come, and check one out? So I went there. It was, again, like astrology. It was like an 8-hour day and it seemed to go by like in 20 minutes. And there were live people. We were representing issues. And so the healing energy in that room was just palpable to me. And I just kept going back. And I never thought I'd ever facilitate this. But then I kind of realized like, oh, I could do it individually,
Yeah.
And
so,
yeah.
Well,
okay,
just
hang on.
question.
Hang on wait 1 second. The healing energy in the room was palpable to me. You know what that reminds me of? My sister, after an energy class, saying, I don't feel energy. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't feel the energy. I'm like, you don't feel yourself spinning? Oh, well, yeah. I said, well, that's your connection to the energy. So I'm just going to keep at it until you believe me. Anyway, go ahead, John.
So when you said the healing energy, when this is done with people in the room, is it like all people of one family, or people kind of bring their own issues individually?
Yeah. So what happens, and this happens whether it's in a group or in an individual session, is that there's one facilitator and there's a client, and you bring one family pattern or one life issue that you would like positive shifting in. And so then the facilitator sets up an initial constellation where he'll say, okay, find somebody to represent your mother, father, and yourself, maybe a sister. And then the client picks out people from the group and places them in a certain way. So it's always important where an object or a person is standing and what they're looking at. And then as you bring in other people, the energy starts shifting. And then there are healing statements that can be made, or I use a meditation and call in the ancestors. And we first get a bird's eye view of what the energy is. And then there are ways to go about putting that energy back in order. And then the people start shifting or moving or changing what they're looking at. Then we can bring in and non-systemic support like Archangel Michael or Metatron or somebody to kind of come in and work with clearing some of the energy. And I would say family constellation work is like getting on a ride, like at an amusement park. You get in the car and you can't stop the constellation until the cars come to a complete stop and you get everything back in an order that the facilitator is looking for.
Cool.
And I'm always amazed when I do it individually and I see everything shifting and I think they're going to be like, oh, I see this and this. And they're usually like, what? And I'm like, when I explain it to them, they're like, because love is to flow like from the parent to the child. Love flows from the former generations down to the subsequent generations. So if you've got and then the siblings have to be in their correct place and order. So if you've got a middle child trying to be the oldest child, then that's going to throw things haywire. You also have to pay attention to sudden deaths or miscarriages. Sometimes because a family member is excluded and they're not in the system, you have to bring them back into the system. So we call it entanglements. And I was entangled with my uncle who passed 5 years before my dad. Well, no, more than that. He was 5 when he passed. And they had 2 other children and then my dad. And they were so grief stricken that my dad said that we couldn't talk about Clarence. There was no picture of him in the house. And I was always fascinated with Clarence. Like, he let go of his dad's hand. He ran in front of a car. He was killed in front of his parents. And I'm in a little town in Michigan. And I'm like, why? Like, I mean, always fascinated. And then I found out with family constellation work, I mean, this is kind of an interesting story. I always would go to these workshops and I'd be like, this is such an easy constellation. We just need to bring Clarence back in. Right. And he never called on me because my teacher goes to the 911 fire of like, this is, what's the most important thing to clear here? But so I never actually constellated Clarence, but it's a long story, but as a result of just being in the workshop, I first found his picture, gave it to my dad. Next time I go visit, my dad's got the picture on the wall. His picture now hangs in my office, and he got brought back into the family. And now all of a sudden, my family that thought I was a witch, they're like asking, how's your work going? And I'm like, what? You're asking about my work? Well, that's like lovely. Clarence is back. I'm not entangled with Clarence anymore, and they can see me more. It's really magical. It's
pretty fascinating. So which actually opens up a litany of questions. But it strikes me that if love flows, the cost of love flows along with it, right? Like if you live in a family that is, let's say, very, very religious, there is a cost to love in a family that's like that. You have to be a certain way, or you must be very pious, or you might be. So I can see where that could totally skew.
Yeah, because you don't individuate.
Right. But what really fascinates me then is, like, say a family where say somebody has a child when they're really young and they give that child up for adoption and then subsequently have a family, right? And now they have 2 more children. The oldest child in that dynamic is not really the oldest child. They're the middle child.
Yep.
And the truth of the matter is, that's me. I'm actually the middle, but in my family cluster with my mother and my father and my brother, I'm the oldest. But I actually have, so wow.
Yeah, adoption is the trickiest thing in family constellations because the adoptee is in 2 family systems. And the family system that takes precedence is their biological mother and father, who they often have no idea.
Well, right. And especially if anybody is my age, of course they don't, because you just wouldn't, right?
Right.
But I mean, even it would have to be interesting doing a reading for somebody, let's say like me, just because I would, you would ask me and I would say I was the oldest, right? but that in fact I'm really not. So that has to be an
Mm-hmm.
interesting way that it presents in the
Mm-hmm.
constellating work, because it would be like, oh, there's something is a little off here, but I don't quite get
Yeah.
why, you know.
Right. Exactly.
But it can still be addressed, even, you know, I always believe you don't have to be 100% aware of something to be able to bring it up for healing and release or clearing, right? So
Right.
I would have to think that things in the constellation work would present in a way that either it would bring it up and it would spark a memory, or it would be, well, this is, you know, this is not quite working, but this is where you seem to belong instead
Mm-hmm.
of over here, or something.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, would
Yeah.
it?
So, yeah, what I do at the start of the session is I will ask about somebody's childhood, their parents, their grandparents, and then oftentimes I'll just see a pattern. Like maybe it's like, well, I don't talk to my sister. Okay. Well, tell me about your mom. Okay, well, my mom, she had a loving parents, but she had this battle with her. She never talked to her sister. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, this is the same pattern. Sometimes it literally repeats. Like if you pay attention to like a couple of like the royal family, these patterns are one to one and they play out in such a public way. And you're like, oh my God, don't you see this?
Right.
Yeah, it's so there's an interview process and we try to get a handle on, what is the issue that needs to come up for now to be kind of put back in order. And the cool thing is once you get everything in order in the session, you kind of just let it go, let it shift, and then things just start they're different in the outer world, and I've really never seen it be negative. It shifts for positive.
Well, sure. I mean,
But you're just kind of because this
well,
energy goes backward and forward, right? So it's that's why I would say it has to be in order when you leave the constellation,
so
because
order is alignment.
mm-hmm,
Okay, let's just follow this path for a second.
okay,
Order is alignment. So if it's in alignment, I don't see how it could be negative.
right,
However, what about this? Alignment could be uncomfortable
mm-hmm,
because now you weren't in alignment for a long time. Now you are in alignment. Well, the way that you were is what you're comfortable with. The
mm-hmm,
way that you are now is maybe outside your comfort zone. So some people might perceive the effects of that as being negative, when in fact what it really is in alignment.
mm-hmm.
So it's still positive. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, and I
It should
think
get comfortable over a bit of time, right?
what we
oh
say
sure.
in this work is like when it's the truth, even when you don't like what the truth is, the truth settles. The truth brings peace. The
Hmm.
truth calms. When you can accept and acknowledge the reality, even if it sucked, it's really better. Like I'll give adoption for an example, right? So if a really wealthy person, if the reason for wanting to adopt is because they couldn't have their own children, and they take a poor person from Rwanda, a poor kid off the streets and bring him here, you think that kid would thrive, right? Like, oh my God, I've got all of this. But oftentimes, like, it still goes wonky a little bit for him because his connection is really to the biological parents in Rwanda. So oftentimes adoptive parents end up with these issues and they're like, how could this be? And it's because the family system has been disrupted.
Well, and wow. I mean, if you really think about it, even so for example, Rwanda or
Mm-hmm.
China or Japan or many of those countries where people adopt children from are rich in tradition
Mm-hmm.
and family hierarchies. And so
Mm-hmm.
really bringing, oh wow, bringing a child over from a place like that is like a vibrational mismatch, right? Like,
if
you know,
you
a child
don't,
that's born
yeah.
of the United States into United States privilege, because that's what it is. No matter, I don't care. You can talk all you want about all the other kinds of privilege there are, but it's a huge privilege to live here.
Right.
But that's not even relevant to the conversation. We have a different way of life than they do. So now you're bringing that child out of this vibrational state and that could cause all kinds of issues.
Yeah. I mean, your best hope is that you honor that child's culture and you keep that child's culture alive.
That's really interesting because, oh man, see, you just hit another memory for me. I watched this show, The Little Couple. Are you familiar at all?
No.
It's about two people, short stature. They both have achondroplasia. You know, short people, little people.
Yeah.
And one is a doctor. She's a really famous doctor who has developed these simulation programs in places like Johns Hopkins and I mean all over the country. And then he's a businessman of some kind. And they adopted two children, one from China and one from India. And their kids are thriving. But as soon as you said it, the very first thing they did when they went to China to pick up that child was to make sure that he had the traditional clothing and the traditional experience. And then when they first got him, he was small, but when he got a little bit older and more able to understand, they took a trip to China to show him where he came from. And I mean, that just makes so much sense because you are involving and honoring instead of trying to say, well, no, you're an American now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I wonder a lot of our immigrants who immigrated from other countries to the U.S., as soon as they got here, their families said, okay, we are not speaking the traditional language. We are only going to speak English because we want to assimilate. And then all kinds of other problems happen, you know, loneliness and disconnectedness because they've intentionally cut off their connections to the other, you know, the other culture's energy.
Well, and you could kind of see why they did that because they were escaping such. Well, sure, right, but often logic and energy don't
go together.
Nope.
Right? They often don't jive.
Yeah.
So
they tried to do the right thing, but
that's the thing. You try to do the right thing. You know, probably would be better for the Rwandan child who was poor on the streets to be raised by an aunt or uncle or a grandparent, somebody in that family system, because
which sadly are probably not in a position to do that. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. I know. It raises all of these kind of complications. Yeah.
It really does. I mean, you know, now of course these people that I was talking about, the reason the children that they adopted the children they adopted is because the children are also little people and they were basically throwaways in their country.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Like probably if you go further back, their outcomes would have been considerably and probably not pleasant different.
Yeah. And I guess this all speaks to, you know, there's the good news is that there are strategies such as this work and other modalities too, or you can write the energy a little bit, I think. Put it in order. It's just kind of knowing that, yeah, this is a thing. If you take somebody out of a family system, you have to explain to them that they're in two systems and honor the biological parent and hold a place for them in your heart.
Interesting. I mean, it really, literally interesting. I mean, it's things that you don't think about, right? And
exactly.
And why I think that it's so amazing right now that we are at least beginning to embrace the idea of working in these systems that you can't see.
Yeah.
Right? Outside of somebody's textbook.
Right.
Outside of traditional thinking, outside of organized religion, outside of those things. Because it's much more open and welcoming and filled with light than some of the other things.
Yeah, exactly. Agreed. Thank God we're going into the age of Aquarius. We'll have all sorts of
right. Like, I mean, I've been waiting for that for a long time. I've been hearing about that my whole life.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Since the song came out.
The 70s. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and the energy of that song is amazing too, by the way. But anyway, so we have just a little bit of time left. And I want to say that this is fascinating too. You are on to something with this, a way to combine the constellation work with the soul, and not just the human, not just the human self, but actually the energetic self, the etheric self, the soul. And I think that it is going to be amazing for a lot of people, because now you will have the capability to bring people into order energetically for their physical lineage. But then also, when you put this together with the Akashic record and their soul story, you'll be able to bring them into order for their etheric lineage, which I just think is going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
So what, you don't have to tell us much, but I mean, what made you think about putting 2 and 2 together with that?
I had a past life reading with a very gifted psychic, and just talked about somebody that I knew before in a former life. And turns out probably the stickiest relationship that I didn't know I had, because we apparently keep repeating the cycle, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, always the same. And what ultimately I realized, we talk about like entanglements and enmeshments in family constellation. So we had this entanglement, enmeshment, and what it dawned on me is like, I see the family constellations as like going horizontal, and the soul is like vertical to me.
Yep.
And then I was like, okay, well, if you can do, and I was kind of having this, I don't know, just debate with another friend who's a facilitator too. And she was always trying to relate this back to my family. And like, it just, all of a sudden I burst out. I go, it's not a family constellation, it's a soul constellation. And I was like, that's it. It's a soul constellation. And then so I've done some work with some practitioners, including input from Angie, vital to this. And I feel like I've gotten a handle on it to the point where we can have a connection, but not an enmeshment. And then the energy can flow, and it doesn't have to be repeated, because if you're entangled with something, whether it's in a family or in your individual soul consciousness, that's looking for resolution, right? So that's always, this just came to me like in the last couple of days after our conversation, Angie. I'm like, that's an entanglement within yourself. And if you don't untangle it, you're going to keep repeating it to try to solve it, but you can't solve it. So it always goes haywire.
Right.
Which is what this did.
And what you're really talking about is another way to do Akashic record clearing, right? Like, I
guess, yeah.
It really, that's what we're talking about here. What I love is that I can actually now, so interesting that you say vertical and horizontal, because we were just talking about that. And,
just last week, literally last
week.
Wow.
And that was Eckhart Tolle, right?
Yep.
Vertical and horizontal.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay.
Yeah, it was a video that we listened to, and the horizontal is like the ego, and the vertical is without ego, right? It's really cool. I'll send you a link to that meditation.
I'd love that.
And you will love it, because he just talks you through it. It's just incredible.
Wow.
But anyway, but what I could see when you started to talk about it was, as you were going, as you were talking about the enmeshments, the entanglements, I could see them winding around the vertical. So if you can identify that entanglement or enmeshment, whatever that might be, and we are working on a way to do that. If you can see where it's wound around, you can unwind it, right? And that's what you're talking about with the constellation work. So this is going to be really kind of fascinating, and just I don't want to use the word just. This is another way for people to have access to a type of healing that is not available in the traditional psychology or whatever world. This can address things and issues that people have that they just can't understand why things keep happening over and over and over again. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Because if I didn't even know about this, how would I know to clear it? At least in your family, you can, you get stories, right? Like I have the story of Clarence, not knowing that I had that entanglement, but I didn't know about this. So then when I found out, I was like, this is priceless that I found this out. So now I can clear it. I mean, can I clear it? That was a whole process to try to clear it, but yeah.
Well, and then it turned out that a lot of it you couldn't clear because it was not appropriate to clear it. But what's interesting that you say that, that the family and you have stories is I've watched enough Who Do You Think You Are and Henry Louis Gates to know that family stories are not always accurate.
That's true. That's true.
And so if you are working on the premise of and I'm not saying that your story wasn't accurate, yours was really only a single generation, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Some people have stories from 2 and 3, 4 generations ago, and the stories like the game of telephone. And so when you start working on the issue based on the story that you can't figure out why you can't clear it. It's because you're looking for the story that matches whatever the one that's being told is being passed down. So in this way, what you're doing, Lisa, is you're looking at the energy of the story without the narrative.
Right.
You're looking for the energy without the narrative. And by finding the energy without the narrative, you can find what needs to be shifted and cleared. And you don't necessarily have to revisit it to be able to clear it. It's going to be revolutionary. Like, I'm so excited for you to come back on when it's all sussed out and we figure out what it looks like, and we're going to do a group or we're going to do something.
Sure.
I can't wait.
Sure.
Wow, look at this. We're already over already. I mean, we're already over time. That's okay. I mean, it's just a couple minutes over. But
people love the show. They're going to watch it.
I mean, why wouldn't they, right? Like, Lisa, it's always wonderful. So wonderful to have you on.
So good to see you.
You too.
It is so wonderful to work with you. And yeah, right. Maybe towards the end of the year, you could come on and just give us a little astrological report of what the next year might kind of look like.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
we could, we could make it. Okay, you guys, you're going to hear it now, and we're going to sort it out and figure it out. We can do a little astrology, a little tarot, a little oracle reading, and make a combination. Maybe we
line
could
it
get
up with the
Val, and
solstice.
we could bring a little We could get Val on too, and bring in a little archangel info.
Yeah.
Maybe we could, have a little access to the druids while we're at it.
Right,
I think that would be a lot of fun. Well, I have access to druids already, as it turns out, but that's not for today. We'll talk about that another day when I'm telling stories. Really cool stories happening over the last couple of weeks. Anyway, Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We can't wait to have you back.
I can't wait to come back.
If you've listened this far, please reach down and hit that subscribe button, because we, would like to get to 100 before the end of the year. We will get to 100 before the end of the year.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. All right. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have to leave this room. Have a wonderful day, everyone. We will talk to you next week.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everyone.